Okay, hey everybody, NG5 here, and I don't know if you can hear the music in the background or not, but I've got something ready to go. As you can see by the title, I'm actually gonna try doing a creepypasta live stream, and I've got some haunted mansion music in the background to get us in the mood. If you can't hear it, just let me know. I'll try a different way. But I'm gonna be looking at two Disney creepypastas. The first one is Abandoned by Disney. And the second is Room Zero. Room Zero is considered the sequel to the. Okay. Hello, Tails SVMF28. How are you? I don't know if you can hear the background noise or whatever. But let's give this a shot. I'm going to be reading it word for word, so sorry if you just see my thing here. You know, just my icon and all that. So let's get started. I'm going to try doing the best I can. And yeah, let's get started. So both of these are by Slime Beast. He did a great job doing these. I think he's done a couple others. But again, if anyone else joins and they can't hear the audio that I'm playing in the background, I'm sorry. I might just show it on the screen then and credit whoever that is. That's you know. Alright, so let's get started here. If you hear a lot of rustling, I might move my computer around because it's in a kind of an odd spot right now. But enough of the delays. Let's go. Both of these by Slime Beast. Let's do this. So first up is Abandoned by Disney. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas, but it didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. It's a fact. You can look it up. But Disney blew $30 million in the place. Yeah, $30 million. That's a ton of money. Then they straight up abandoned it. Straight out of... Sorry, I had to throw that in there. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. But that's where the factual nature of the story ends. It wasn't sand, and obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. I sincerely doubt said reasons were legitimate. You know why? You know why I don't buy the official story? It's because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began building construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, palace in the center of the whole thing. Didn't know they like Sonic Adventure. Anyway, if you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story of The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it, you'd know it as a Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals, and simultaneously threatened or pursued by other animals. Fight or flight situation. Mowgli's Palace was controversial from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was even a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. Local gov claimed eminent domain on people's homes, but then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some kind of highway project, but knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. There was also concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to tell everyone how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, pretty much everyone flipped their shit. And we're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths. Not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern U.S. Questionable mix at that point in history. I guess even today, really, that wouldn't fly either. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Well, Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. Houses were razed, the land was cleared, wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. Anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions and then split. Same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. Surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down. No one knew what the hell to think, but they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want it in the first place. Honestly, didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I lived maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who explored Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals, probably from all around, had a hand in wrecking the place. I'm gonna wreck it. People there felt just as angry as Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merch after that? What I'm getting to is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there's anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not gonna say I wasted no time getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on that palace resort. Rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had to be scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, is that no one before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV and newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know? Recently, I heard corporations could actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, though, it's probably not that no one spoke of the resort, but rather words were made inaccessible. In the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old-as-hell map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the 80s, that was recent? I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I only remembered it months into my research, and even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. The locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowths. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there, and had tried to reclaim the land. Let me just pause for a moment. Okay, still the one person. I hope you can still hear that music. Actually, real quick, just want to make sure people know about what I'm doing. So far, so good, though. I am very much enjoying this little bit here. Alright, give me 1 second here, people. Sorry to suddenly stop the creepypasta, but I am really getting into it. Okay, there we go. Alright, let's get back to it. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." clearly the handiwork of some past local and employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the palace were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood untended and ragged amongst piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse. This was some sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird shit covered the whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled or chipped away. And the doors weren't just open, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone once again painted "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I found inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark and bare that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen is, you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, and every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like really old piss. Huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat. And as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small, it was almost impossible to see. Figured it might have been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, and carefully let it go. Within seconds, it started to swing once more. Bathrooms were pretty much in the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts or other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and sinks and the bidettes in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, or leaked, or just ran freely. Seemed to me they should have shut the water off a long time ago. And there were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked. I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in the room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. It was like a whisper, probably my own breathing, echoing in silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. But this is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced, why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there, or they probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note, and I wasted the trip up. And as I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently had missed. Something that would at least give me one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 8 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. then stood on my toes and snapped another. Moved closer again to get the detail of its face. But slowly, casually, the python lifted its head directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees. All 8 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on the floor plan map was the reptile house. Oh, I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging over for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. Took a few deep breaths and slapped my face to get myself right in the head after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down, unless I wanted to recline in broken glass and dead leaf carpet, or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. Pulled a wedge off the metal wall once again, painted with the abandoned by Disney motto I'd become accustomed to. Placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to at least keep somewhat clean. The stairway led down below ground level. Used my camera flash as a sort of improv flashlight. I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. The sign on the door read, a real sign. It read, mascots only. Thank you. This perked up my spirits a little bit for 2 reasons. 1, a mascots only area would definitely have some interesting stuff back in the day, and 2, the padlock was still in place. Nobody went down there. Not vandals, looters, nobody. It's the only place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantingly steal. I mean, I had come to the palace essentially agreeing to myself that it was okay to take anything because, hey, abandoned. And it didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, no, didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall the padlock was hooked to. Time of the Day had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else apparently had thought of or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change to the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking a toll. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a punching clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered all over scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old stack-filled television and long rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It's like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything's left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, paper scattered and almost melted with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real, rotting crimson floor covering. And it felt kind of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when even I applied the least amount of force. Clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell into moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dark, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted to photograph that twisted, stinking mess. But try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. There was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. The inside of the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look around for a light switch in the wall by the door, but nothing. I made my search. I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rolls of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was just going to keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought I would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd, though, and I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume in the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. Fur on the costume was rotten and shredding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. Photo negative of the actual Mickey. Black where he should have been white, white where he should have been black, because normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. Take a picture of the costume taken on the walls, upward angle, downward angle, side shots to show an entire row of frozen Puget cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes mixing. Then I decided to stage shot just one of the bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. And as I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you would expect, and moved to the door. I stood in the doorway. I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know. I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start. Even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. And that's when Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The costume or whoever was inside of it stood there at the center of the room, fake face staring directly as I mumbled, "No, no, no," over and over and over. Shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that, damn it, once again had turned to jelly. I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. And as the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died. Blank, quiet, and broken. And I raised my eyes to the Mickey costume again. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Wanna see my head come off?" And started pulling its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free from a predator's jaws. And as it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. "Abandoned by God." I never got the pictures out of the camera. I didn't write an entry blog about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity or my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. And they didn't want anything like that getting out. Okay, that was Abandoned by Disney. I'm going to transition to Room Zero, and then after that I'll explain what I liked about these two and what I thought could have improved. Hello, Wolf Knight 797. Sorry if I'm not reading the comments. I'm trying to do, again, the whole word for word thing, so again, I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm just trying to, And I'll do the verbal disclaimer real quick. The creepypastas belong to the author Slime Beast. The music, if you're hearing it in the background, it's the Haunted Mansion, but it's for 10 hours. And this is by Disney Dan. I just want to let YouTube know I'm just using it for entertainment reasons. It's hopefully a background sound, and hopefully it's not too overpowering. Let me just do one more thing here. I'm really getting into this. And I got that out. Hopefully some more people will show up. Which I'll do one more time. Sorry, I'm trying to send the link out. There we go. Alright, let's get back into it. Next up is Room Zero. This is the sequel to Abandoned by Disney. So Room Zero by Slime Beast. Let's get into it. It's been a while since I've written anything related to the Disney Corporation, and I'm sure you can understand why. Lots been going on since my last post. I've received a lot of questions and concerns from folks who read my first-hand account of Mowgli's Palace, a resort that was built and abandoned by Disney. But I want to thank everyone who mirrored my post. It's been taken down from a few places, mostly corporate sites that were easily leaned on by a larger power. However, for every nuked topic or disappearing blog post, it seems like 100 more have popped up. This is something they'll have to face. There's no turning back from them. None for me either. I'm definitely being followed. For the first month or two, I chalked it up to paranoia. Any casual glance or half smile in my direction set me off. Hair standing on the back of my neck and everything. The first one I was actually able to spot was a telephone worker milling around my apartment complex. He was middle-aged, doughy, just dressed as you'd expect, but something just seemed off about him. Couldn't place it, but I knew this wasn't my imagination acting up. He was awkward, out of place, not somebody who was comfortable doing his routine job. Followed him around a corner, only to lose him there, but when I turned back to go home, there he was, staring directly at me about 10 feet behind me, expressionless and cold. "Exploring?" he asked. That was all he said, and there was an accusing tone in his voice. But tell me, what blue-collar phone jockey does that? I guess that's the worst part. Never feeling safe, never feeling alone. That and the occasional Disney merch left somewhere for me to find. Little rubber Mickeys in the mailbox, Disney Adventure magazine on my bookshelf. They hide little Mickeys everywhere. 3 circles, 1 big, 2 small, and the silhouette of the famous mouse's head. And I've started keeping a running list of Mickeys I found. Coffee cup and rings on my coffee table, 1 big, 2 small. Colored glass bottles left on the doorstep, viewed from the top down, all red. Graffiti on the wall on my way to work, a huge earth, small sun, and moon in the proper locations. They're everywhere. People have emailed me about this as well. If you repost anything I have to say, I gotta start finding those little sons of bitch outlines, I guarantee it. The best one by far, the one that actually made me laugh because of the horror of it all, was a drawing in chalk next to my car. I was taken aback at first, walking through the parking garage, keeping an eye out for people following me. The outline seemed perfect for a murder victim. You're probably familiar with if you've read my past posts. But written in yellow paint, I'm sure was a single word. Retract. The only good thing that's come out of all this is I know I'm not the only one who's seen something they shouldn't have. I'm not going to give out names because, well, if I have to tell you why, you really haven't been paying attention. Researcher. Goes to Disney parks whenever he can, all throughout the year. But he's not going to have fun, enjoy the rides, all that stuff. He's looking for mascots. There's been a long tradition, apparently, of people reporting strange patrons throughout the park. Silent, motionless, staring patrons of every age, shape, and size. Men and women, adults, children, and teens. All wearing Disney-themed cast masks. Well, way back when Disney would get tons of complaints about oddly dressed folks following others around the park. Folks who would then merge into the crowds and disappear. Later on, the gas masks caused folks to draw other conclusions. Reports of possible terrorists and bombers started flowing. All those reports most likely went straight to the trash can. I know I can't find any sign of such occasions reported on by the media. Though you should be aware of the fact Disney can pretty much control its press like no other. Researcher goes to the parks, talks to a few people, and tries not to draw any attention to himself. He'll just ask 3 or 4 families if they've seen his friend who's wearing a funny mask. He has yet to see a gas cod for himself. On one occasion, a child pointed him towards Frontierland, and as he raced through the crowd, he heard a single voice that cried out, "Hey, Mommy, I want a Goofy hair mask too!" A fellow I'll call lifeguard worked in a Disney water park from 2001 to 2003. Stood on top of a huge water slide and made sure none of the kids got too rowdy. He passed the kids through one at a time, telling them over and over again, "Be safe, keep your arms in, blah, 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 blah." One day as he tells it, this fat kid goes down the tube and doesn't come out the other end. He sent 2 or 3 kids after. The whole thing was a steady clip, so naturally if you expect if Fatty got stuck, the kids that followed him would get stuck too. Not really. Only the big kid disappears. Everyone else comes out the other end, cheering and splashing like nothing's wrong. Lifeguard shuts down the slide, much to the aggravation of the kids waiting. But before he can go through any of Disney's strict procedures, splash, Fatty finally comes out. Staff members pulled the kid out of the water. He sank like a stone when he hit. His skin already blue and his eyes wide. All he would say is, "No face kids," and stop squeezing. But the kid was okay, in case you're wondering. He got carted right up to the medical center. When the lifeguard was told to open the slide back up, he made a big stink about it, about how clearly it wasn't safe. But despite his complaints, he was threatened with firing and begrudgingly opened the slide again. From that point on, he kept a closer eye on the kids. Every now and then, they come out the wrong order. Never stuns the fat kid, but always with a vague look of concern. A dreamy half-stupor that seemed as if they were trying to figure out what was reality. They take on some water and choke a bit, but they never come back up to right again. I read his emails with the same sort of unease you might be feeling right now. I want to share his own story, but in the end, I don't want to expose himself that way. Can't say I blame him. Snow White, which wasn't the actual role she played, was a character in the park. She had a nice little tidbit for me. You know what happens when a costume employee drops dead in his suit? Like, 1 second he's taking a picture with little Jimmy, and next, he's had a fatal stroke. A second costume mascot in the area has to sit with the corpse on a curb or a bench and wait for a designated dry cleaner to arrive and cart the body away in a discreet manner. All the while, patrons have no idea they're sitting with a dead body for photo ops. Hey, feel free to check your photo albums at this point. That was bad, but another fellow janitor went completely off the creepy charts. Disney World, and probably others, are built with a series of underground tunnels just below your feet. 3 stories worth. Anything and everything you can imagine is down there for use of employees. They're called utility corridors. Basically, that's the reason you don't see characters out of place or janitors walking through the park. They pop in and out of hidden doors and travel like a concealed town you're walking on. Janitor told me something that might be common knowledge, but nonetheless news to me. Walt Disney had several apartments built into his parks. There's one above Cinderella's castle, one above the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. They're all over the place. More than that, there are nightclubs, movie theater, bowling alley, and much more. All behind doors built right into the whimsical facades you pass by without a second look. Club 22 is one such hidden area. If you have the cash to join the exclusive club, you probably don't, then you'll have access to it and much more. Club 22 is a place where anything goes. Disney Co. calls these places dark zones, spots where the squeaky clean visage of Mickey Mouse gives way to drinking, drugs, and, well, sex. Conversely, the rest of the park is the bright zone, with a few gray zone utilidors between. As far as Jandra has said, it wasn't always that way. It was more of a slow decline and gradual relaxation of social norms within that elite group. And the reason he knows all this, you may have already guessed, he's cleaned it. After a lengthy background check and non-disclosure form, janitor moved up from a park attendant to one of the dark zone cleaning crews. Now before you get some satanic human sacrifice vision in your head, janitor saw nothing of the sort. Lots of empty alcohol Lots of empty alcohol bottles? Well, yeah. Used condoms scattered like deflated New Year's balloons? Oh, hell yeah. He cleaned up his share of blood, piss, and vomit, but it was all down to the unrestricted behavior of patrons as opposed to any sort of cult behavior. At least that's how he sees it in retrospect. But all that trash, all that profane shit went into a furnace and mingled with the smoke of a quaint cottage chimney. So if you've been to Disney World, you've breathed ultra-condensed sin. Backing up this information was Hammer. Hammer mailed me the old-fashioned way, though I don't know how he got my home address. He sent me photocopies of work papers proving his employment, with the instruction to burn them when I was convinced, which I did gladly. Hammer worked around the Disney World Park, doing demolition and construction. At one point, he approached a superior regarding some strange construction plans. There was a wide rectangular area marked off on the blueprints, about the size of a supermarket. The area was left unnamed and only bore the words, "Do not dig." Now, not only was this superior in the dark, but he was super fucking purposefully out of the dark, in the dark. He didn't want to talk about it, he didn't want to know about it, ended the conversation with, "This space intentionally left blank." Hammer didn't get it. The area seemed a waste of space and was directly conflicting with the work his team had been given. He started poking around the area on his off time, finding only a derelict steel door and a great span of concrete just beyond. It was a supermarket's worth of blank gray floor. Soon after, Hammer started picking gas gods out of the crowds. Unlike all the other reports, the people, the things would stand in full view of the guy. They'd cluster together in the distance, or they'd just be pressed against the wall when he turned a corner. And he said they moved weird, like they were weak or injured, like a deer that's been run down by a hunter can't flee anymore. The gas masks, the Disney character faces with filters jammed in, he noted they seemed wet on the inside, like condensation on a car window. Tiny beads of water glimmered behind the gas, making it impossible for any of them to actually see. Probing further, Hammer started asking questions of anyone and everyone who had been working in the park for a decade or more. He had dead ends throughout until he was directed to Ida, an elderly woman who worked in a restaurant on Main Street. She'd been there since way back, and though nobody had the balls to ask directly, everyone knew she had plenty of terrible stories to tell. Hammer asked about the empty space, then about the gas mask customers, and at first he thought he could receive the same non-answers he had gotten so far. She was quiet. Eerily quiet. "Room 0, she croaked. A single shaking hand placed to her cheek as if she were a little girl fearing father's punishment. She didn't meet the man's gaze for the entire conversation. Room 0, as it turned out, was yet another hidden room, just like the apartments in Club 22. However, its sheer size and spot deep beneath the park set it apart from any of the fun dark zones. It was a bomb shelter. Room 0 was built to withstand a massive attack, and it could be conducted by foreign or domestic enemies. Room 0 was also to be stocked with enough rations to feed the entire park's average number of patrons at any given moment. It housed a smaller yet lavish panic room of sorts for Disney higher-ups. During World War II, official Disney gas masks were actually produced for children to wear in the event of an attack. The idea was that it would be less scary for kids if Mickey's face was emblazoned on the wartime safety device. And yeah, I know the problems with that, obvious ones. And during the Cold War scare of the 60s, when Disney World was constructed, Room 0 was stocked with similar masks as well. Whether they cared about the fears of the children or just callous branding, the things found their way down there. What's more, some genius decided that kids would then be frightened by the gas masks their parents wore. So all masks, adult and child, were made to comply with this insane standard. Ida described it as treating a wound with lemon juice. None of this explained what Hammer had been seeing, though. Not only the seemingly supernatural appearances, but the emptied out room as well. "I've been there," he explained. "There's nothing but a cement floor and 4 walls." No. Ida shook her head and covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "You've been on top of it." Someone or something sounded the alarm one day when the park was at full capacity. The warning was clear. It was supposedly an air attack. Security ushered everyone down into the tremendous shelter. There, they were ordered to put on their masks and hunker down for the duration of the assault. Everything was quiet for about 30 minutes, save for the crying children and frightened whispers. No one wanted to die, and so they were thankful in a way for the strange measure of safety. But then the first scream rang out. "Hey!" a man shouted. "Quit pinching!" Waves and shrieks and yelps rippled through the crowd from one wall to the other, back and forth. "Who's running around? Settle down!" someone hollered. "Hey, who's laughing? This isn't funny!" "Oof, who stepped on my foot?" Despite security guards urging to calm down and keep their cool, the crowd became more and more agitated until finally, after nearly an hour of madness, the lights flickered, then died. What followed could only be described as utter chaos. In the dark, only the wails of the young and the anguished cries of adults could be heard in a massive, swelling din that bloodied the ears of all within that black echo chamber. A group of staff members and a select few patrons made it out of the door, ready to face the war above rather than that insanity below. But what they found, of course, was a desolate yet untouched theme park. The music continued to play, echoing through the silent storybook towns. Upon returning to Room Zero, the few who stood at the top of the steel staircase that led down into the pitch blackness heard no sign of the previous fray. There was only silence. Ida herself descended that staircase despite the begging of those she left above. She reached the reinforced doors, herself now awash in darkness and hearing only the buzzing in her ears. A single voice came out of the darkness. The echo made it impossible to tell whether the mocking, raspy voice was at the back of the bomb shelter or if it was right in front of her face. "Shut the door, dear. You are letting out the cold." Gripped by terror, she did just that. Within days, the entire thing, shelter, staircase, all of it, was covered with feet upon feet of cement. Air systems and generators above its ceiling were removed, creating the large empty space. "They're all still down there," Ida told Hammer. "Down there with whoever that was." You might have noticed I've used Ida's name. Unfortunately, she passed away soon after telling her story. Accidental fall, supposedly, after getting out of bed to turn on a light. Such a company devotee, the paper reported, that her entire bedroom was covered with Mickey silhouettes. Whew! That was a lot. That was a lot of stuff to explain. Or rather, just a giant amount of reading. Okay, so what do I think about these two creepypastas? They are definitely classics. And if you notice, I try to get into those creepypastas as much as I could. Now, let's talk about the good and the bad of both of them. I'll start with Abandoned by Disney. Abandoned by Disney is honestly one of the best creepypastas I've read. And there actually is some truth behind Abandoned by Disney. I'm not lying. So if I look it up, I'm doing that now. Okay. So yeah, the Abandoned by Disney, let's get a little factual here. Abandoned by Disney was about this treasure island resort in Baker's Bay at the very north end of the Bahamas. So there's that going for it. It was originally the actual Discovery Island that the creepypasta is based on. It was built in Bay Lake, Florida. It's and it's actually pretty big, 11.5 acres. It's a pretty big island. So between 1974 and 1999, it was an attraction open to guests. And it started off as Treasure Island, then renamed to Discovery Island. You can't go on it, but you can still see it from the water. And let's see. So here's some interesting history. In 1900, this was originally known as Raz Island, And in the 30s, it was purchased for $800 by a man named Delmar Radio Nick Nicholson, who renamed it as Idle Bay Isle. It was later sold, renamed Riles Island, and then Disney bought it in 1965 for strategic property. Delmar still lived on the island and grew exotic plants prior to the island's acquisition. And that right there is where the lost tape of Treasure Island comes in because of Delmar Nicholson. Nice. Let's see. Treasure Island opened on April 8th, 1974, and closed exactly 20 years. Let's see, 74, 84, 94. 25 years exactly it was open, and then it closed down. But it operated a little bit more. It stayed open until July 9th, 1999, because they were relocating all the animals to Disney's Animal Kingdom. And as of this year, all the original buildings are still there, which is really crazy. You could still see it from the monorail, apparently. But yeah, this place actually exists in real life. And this is the inspiration for Abandoned by Disney. I love the buildup of Abandoned by Disney. It's basically like a Disney diehard wanting to find out about a legit abandoned place. So they get all their stuff ready, they get their gear and all that, and how do I word it? They find the abandoned place and then look around. Obviously, things are broken and smashed. Then they go down into the they go down. It's one person. He goes down into the character prep, and that's where he finds that crazy negative Mickey, which honestly in itself sounds kind of cool. At the same time, seeing that, I would just be like, But yeah, the build-up was good, and the thing I liked is it didn't use a whole lot of cliches or anything. It was a very, very good narrative. The only beef I have with Abandoned by Disney is after the whole experience, you're just like, you pull the whole, I'm never going to touch foot on that, I'm never going to talk about it again. Well, that's where Room Zero comes in, because it's like, you made a pact with yourself to say like, oh, I'm never going to touch that stuff again. But then you're pretty much in Room Zero, the way it started. I'll segue into that now. Room Zero basically is the sequel to Abandoned by Disney, because it's the same guy, if you noticed, that ended Abandoned by Disney. He was basically pressured into saying, well, what did you find? And he's like, but I don't want to just say it, basically. Room Zero was really good. When I first read this, actually, back when this came out, and I'm trying to remember when this actually came out, because it's definitely been a while. Wish there was a way I could tell, but I'm sure there's a way. But the whole thing with Room Zero, it was structured a little odd. It was like bouncing around from person to person, and it was hard to follow at first, but then I realized they're all kind of connected. Each of the stories all kind of fit together, and it ends on a really creepy note. And that one voice that says, shut the door, dear, you're letting out the cold, that could have been like a ghost of something. And honestly, the whole thing with everyone starting to scream and panic and then all the lights going out in Room Zero, that honestly sounds like just pure insanity. You know, you're in there for over an hour. Yeah, it says, everything was quiet for about 30 minutes, save for that, then the first screaming out. So after 30 minutes of sitting in a giant shelter with nothing to do, I kind of feel insanity definitely will start taking hold. But the whole lights thing, I think it meant that, like, this was at least 100 feet underground or something. And the way she died is also kind of crazy because, you know, she probably got scared by all the silhouettes or whatever. But that also might mean she might have had, Ida here might have had a moment at Mowgli's palace. You don't know. It's really crazy how these two are connected. Now, which, there wasn't too much in terms of bad with Room Zero. It was oddly more structured than Abandoned by Disney. But when you first read these, They are a little hard to follow initially. And the one thing that they both don't have, as I mentioned a minute ago, is they're not loaded with cliches. If you want something that's like cliche to the brim, look up the word troll pasta. It's a creepypasta intentionally written bad. Um so yeah, there's that. This is my first attempt at doing a creepypasta reading. And if I did sound a little odd in both of them, I was honestly trying to get into the mood, like I mentioned a minute ago. But both of these were really good. The only little dislike I have about these two is the way Abandoned by Disney ended. I'll never do this again. You're gonna have to. It's like, you talked about it, you're gonna have to tell about it, whether you like it or not. And one last time regarding the whole disclaimer thing, the audio, if you were hearing it, it's by Disney Dan. Just using it for entertainment purposes only. So yeah, how long have I been running it for? Yeah, pretty much an hour. Tomorrow I'll be going over Ghostbusters, and Saturday I'll be going over Ghostbusters 2. Hopefully I'll have a few people with me to talk about those awesome movies. But yeah, Abandoned by Disney, Room Zero. Definitely two creepypastas worth reading. I'm NG5, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Stay healthy.